The first thing Mateo heard was his mother apologizing to someone who had already decided not to forgive her. In the service corridor behind the Ashcroft Grand Ballroom, Alina Ruiz stood with a stack of white napkins in her arms and panic hidden badly beneath her housekeeping uniform. The air smelled like lemon polish, hot linen, and rain carried in through the loading dock. Beside the ice machine, her 8-year-old son sat on an overturned supply crate with his backpack in his lap and a pencil tucked behind one ear, trying to make himself smaller than a child should ever have to be. Across from them, Karen Sloan, the acting operations manager, pressed a clipboard to her chest and said, in the cold, bright tone some people use when they want their cruelty to sound official, "This is a 5-star property, Alina. Not a daycare. Investors arrive in less than an hour. You don't bring your child to work and expect the hotel to adapt." "Please," Alina said, "just until noon. The school closed, my sitter canceled, and he's been quiet all morning. I can finish my floor and be gone before the luncheon." Karen's mouth tightened. "Turn in your master key. HR will send your final paperwork, effective immediately." It happened that fast. 6 years of work reduced to one bad morning and a woman with no patience for inconvenience. Mateo looked up. Alina's fingers trembled against the napkins. Somewhere beyond the swinging doors, silverware clinked against china as the ballroom was set for people who would later talk about service and excellence, without ever seeing the faces that made either one possible. Then the elevator at the end of the corridor opened. A man stepped out carrying a worn leather bag instead of the expensive luggage someone of his rank should have owned. He was tall, somewhere in his early 40s, coat damp from the rain, eyes sharp in the way eyes become when they have learned to notice what polished places try to hide. Karen turned at once. "Mr. Cross, we weren't expecting you until 10. The new general manager didn't answer her. His gaze had gone straight to the boy on the crate, then to the mother standing too straight because if she bent even a little she might collapse. He stopped walking. When he spoke, his voice was quiet enough to force everyone else into silence. "Leave the key with her," he said. Then he looked at Mateo again, and something old and private crossed his face. "I was that kid. If you believe a person's hardest morning should not erase years of sacrifice, take a second to like this video, subscribe, and share it with someone who still believes kindness belongs in the real world." Because what happened next did not begin with power. It began with memory. Alina Ruiz was 34, widowed, and so used to carrying too much that even her exhaustion had become disciplined. She had worked at the Ashcroft Grand for 6 years. She knew which guests needed extra towels, which brides cried before photographs, and how to make a room feel cared for in 12 minutes flat. What she could not do was stop life from breaking on schedule. 2 years earlier, her husband Daniel had left for a roofing job and never come back. A rusted support failed beneath him before lunch. After that, Alina's life became a series of private calculations. What could wait? What could not? Rent could not. Groceries could not. Grief, unfortunately, could, so she kept moving. She packed lunches, took double shifts, stretched soup across 2 dinners, and let herself feel tired only as long as the kettle took to boil. Mateo had changed after Daniel died. He was not loud in his sadness. He was careful in it. He lined up pencils by color. He folded his socks before bed. He noticed when the refrigerator sounded wrong, when his mother counted cash twice, when her shoulders went still in the doorway before she came home fully smiling. He had become the kind of child who tried to help by taking up less space. That morning went wrong before sunrise. At 5:12 a.m., Alina got 2 messages that rearranged the day. Her elderly neighbor, who watched Mateo before school 3 mornings a week, had been called to the hospital overnight and could not return in time. Then the school text came. A water main had burst, classes were canceled. Alina called everyone she could think of. A cousin across town, a school mother she barely knew, the church volunteer who sometimes helped with groceries. No answer. Busy. Sorry, not today. When Mateo walked into the kitchen in rocket print pajama pants, Alina was still standing there in one earring and her work shoes, staring at her phone like it might turn merciful if she waited. "Is it a bad morning?" he asked. "Just a complicated one," she said. He looked at her for a moment, then at the uniform laid over the chair, then back at her face. "I can be invisible," he said. There are sentences children say that reveal the shape of the world they think they live in. Alina crossed the kitchen, knelt in front of him and held his face in both hands. "No, baby. You are not supposed to be invisible." But by 6:30, she was buttoning his cleanest sweater, packing crackers and apple slices into a bag, and bringing him through the employee entrance of the hotel, because sometimes love does not look noble. Sometimes it looks like choosing the least impossible option and praying no one cruel notices. She did not want Mateo to see the hidden machinery behind luxury. Not because she was ashamed of her work. She was. Work done with care has dignity in it. But she knew how early children learn which people get thanked and which ones are only noticed when something goes wrong. So she turned the morning into a game. She settled him at a metal table near the pastry station, with blank paper from the back office recycle bin. Rosa, the pastry cook, gave him a warm blueberry muffin and called him quality control. Alina crouched to his level and said, "Read your library book. Draw me 10 dinosaurs. Count the people who forget to smile." "There are a lot of them," Mateo said. "Then you have important work." For an hour it almost held. Alina cleaned rooms on the west floor at the speed fear teaches. Outside, rain brushed the windows. Inside, staff prepared for the investor luncheon that would welcome the hotel's new general manager, Julian Cross, the latest rumor walking toward their building from Chicago. Some said he was ruthless. Some said he had started at the bottom. Some said he was the kind of executive who noticed dust on light fixtures and numbers in people's faces. Alina had no room in her life for rumors. She only needed to make it to noon. But polished institutions have a way of locating vulnerability as if it were a stain. Karen found Mateo at 8:17. Not because he was loud. He was. Not because he was running around. He was sitting exactly where Alina had left him, sketching a stegosaurus in a bellhop hat while Rosa glazed fruit tarts 3 feet away. Karen found him because he existed where the image of the hotel said he should not. By the time Alina was called downstairs, Karen had already decided what kind of story this was. Not a widow in an impossible morning. Not a good employee protecting her child and her paycheck at once. Just a problem to be removed before the new boss arrived. And then the new boss arrived in the middle of the firing. When Julian Cross said, "I was that kid," he did not say it for effect. He said it like memory had reached out from 30 years earlier and caught him by the throat. His mother had cleaned motel rooms on the edge of a highway when he was 9. On Saturdays she brought him because she had no one else and no money for anyone else. He remembered sitting on upside-down detergent buckets doing homework while dryers shook the walls. He remembered pretending not to hear his mother apologize for existing inconveniently. He remembered one manager telling her in front of him that if she could not separate motherhood from work, then she did not deserve either. She lost that job 3 days later. What saved them was not one grand rescue. It was a chain of ordinary decencies. A line cook who slipped them leftover chicken in a paper bag. A 4th-grade teacher who let Julian keep library books over winter break. A bus driver who waved them on twice when they were short on fare. A woman named Marable who told his mother about another cleaning job before rent came due. His life had been altered by people who had very little and still refused to look away. He never forgot that. Not when he got scholarships. Not when he learned the language of hotel revenue and renovation budgets. Not when he sat in conference rooms full of people who used the word staff like they were talking about wiring inside a wall. He had taken the Ashcroft job because the numbers needed fixing. He arrived early because the culture did too. Now he looked at Mateo and saw exactly what he had once been, a decent child trying to disappear so his mother could survive a shift. "What's your name?" Julian asked. "Mateo," the boy whispered. "Were you causing trouble here, Mateo?" Mateo shook his head. "I was counting people who forgot to smile." Even Karen flinched at that. "Mr. Cross," she said tightly, "I'm handling a staff violation." Julian turned to her. "Are you?" His voice never rose. That made the corridor feel even smaller. "Employees cannot bring children into service areas during operations," Karen said. "Especially on a day like today." "And yet," Julian said, looking at Mateo's backpack, the untied shoe, the crushed drawing in his lap. "What I see is a child sitting quietly with a pencil, and a mother being punished for not having enough money to solve an emergency more elegantly." Karen opened her mouth. But before she could answer, Julian asked Alina, "How long have you worked here?" "6 years. "Any write-ups?" Karen cut in. "That's not relevant." "It is to me." The corridor went still, then something unexpected happened. Rosa wiped her hands on her apron and spoke first. "No write-ups." "She stayed half the night when the pipe burst on 14 last winter." Theo, the dishwasher, lifted his chin. "She helped me take apart the sink trap after my wedding ring went down the drain." "Stayed an hour late." Nia from the front desk added, "Mrs. Denham in 1108 only asks for Alina because she remembers the blanket for her knees before anyone else does." Otis from maintenance, toolbox still in hand, said, "Her kid S been here an hour and he's quieter than most executives." No one had planned it. That was why it mattered. This was the real record of a person's life, the one files never fully keep, the net of quiet witnesses, the kindness chain. Rosa had once sent soup home with Alina when Mateo had a fever. Nia had paid her bus fare on a day payday was still 24 hours away. Otis had fixed a broken shelf in Alina's apartment after hearing Mateo say he would hold the shampoo bottles so they wouldn't fall. People with their own bills, their own tired feet, their own disappointments had kept this small family from dropping through the cracks more times than anyone important would ever know. Julian listened. Then he asked Karen, who authorized immediate termination. The question landed harder than accusation. Karen hesitated. She had authority to document, to send someone home, to escalate to HR. She did not have authority to end 6 years of employment in a corridor, because panic made cruelty feel efficient. Julian understood that from the silence. He crouched in front of Mateo. "Can I see your drawing?" Mateo handed it over. A stegosaurus in a bellhop hat stared proudly from the page. For the first time that morning, Julian smiled. "This is excellent." Mateo studied him with grave attention. Then he asked, in the clear, unprotected voice only children can manage, "Did your mom get in trouble too?" Julian did not lie. "Yes." "Did she keep her job?" "No." Mateo looked down for 1 second, then back up. "So did you come back for her?" Years later, people would remember that line more vividly than the firing itself, because in 7 words, a child had found the center of everything. Julian stood slowly. "Maybe," he said, "or maybe I came back so it doesn't happen again." Then he turned to Alina. "You are not fired, you're on the clock. Your son is our guest until we solve the rest of this day properly. Anyone who has a problem with that can bring it to me." Alina blinked like someone dragged unexpectedly into sunlight. "Mr. Cross, I finish breathing first," he said. "You can thank me later if you still want to." That nearly broke her. The rest of the hotel kept moving because hotels always do. Trays rolled. Coffee brewed. Investors arrived under umbrellas. But the weather inside that corridor had changed. Julian spent the next hours learning the building the way a doctor studies a scan. He read Alina's file. No disciplinary marks, dozens of guest commendations, perfect attendance for 9 months after Daniel's death except the day of the funeral. He spoke to staff privately and heard more. Alina had covered Christmas Eve for a coworker whose daughter was in a school play. She had sat with a confused elderly guest until his son drove in from another city. She had sewn the hem of a flower girl's dress in the laundry room 15 minutes before a wedding procession. None of this was in her job description. All of it was why the hotel worked. By noon, Julian knew two things. Alina Ruiz was exactly the kind of employee corporations claim to value and often exploit because loyalty is easy to overuse. And Corinne Sloan had built authority on humiliation. He did not fire Corinne theatrically. Real justice is rarely loud. He removed her supervisory power pending review, documented misuse of disciplinary authority, and required retraining if she wanted to remain. Professionalism, he told her in his office while rain silvered the windows, is not the art of making vulnerable people feel disposable. At lunch, he carried 2 trays into the employee dining room himself. Soup, crackers, fruit for Mateo, rice, chicken, coffee for Alina. She stood when he approached. He motioned gently for her to sit. For a moment they ate in the humming quiet of vending machines and fluorescent lights. Mateo split his crackers into exact halves, a habit his father had taught him. Julian noticed and looked away with the respect of someone who understood that grief can sit at a table long after the dead are gone. Finally, Alina said, "You didn't have to do this." "Yes," Julian said. "I did." He told her then about his mother's rubber gloves, the motel laundry room, the manager who spoke through her instead of to her. Power is a small word for what people can do to each other in moments like that, he said. So is mercy. Alina twisted the paper napkin in her hands. "I almost stayed home," she admitted. "I stood at my door for 5 minutes and thought maybe if I lost one shift, maybe I could recover next week. But rent is due Monday." So I told him we were going on an adventure. Julian smiled faintly. "My mother used to call it that too." Mateo looked up. "A work adventure, the worst kind," Julian said. That made Mateo laugh, and the sound was so sudden, so clean, that Alina had to look down at her tray for a second just to steady herself. That afternoon, Julian arranged emergency paid leave for Alina, asked HR to gather backup childcare resources, and made sure Mateo left with a pastry box from Rosa and his drawing tucked safely in his backpack. But he didn't stop with rescue. Within a month, a disused office became an emergency family room for staff. He revised policy so no single supervisor could terminate an employee on the spot, except in genuine danger, and he pushed through a modest care stipend for low-wage workers. Buildings remember what leadership teaches them. The Ashcroft Grand did not become perfect. There were still understaffed weekends, broken machines, impossible guests, and budgets that treated compassion like an optional luxury. But the air changed. Perry from housekeeping left crossword puzzles there because he heard Mateo liked them. Rosa started a shelf of donated children's books. Nia taped a note inside the cupboard door. "If today asked too much of you, sit first. Decide later." Alina felt the change slowly and then all at once. A few weeks later, a regular guest pressed a note into her hand before checkout. It read, "The world remains bearable because some people still do small things beautifully." Alina cried in the service stairwell when she read it, not because she had almost been fired, not even because Julian had stopped it, but because being rescued is one kind of miracle and being seen is another. By winter, Julian promoted her to housekeeping floor coordinator, not out of pity, out of evidence. When he placed the new badge in her hand, Alina stared at it as if it might disappear. "I've never managed anyone," she said. Julian answered, You've been steadying people for years. Management is just the part where we finally admit it. That afternoon, Mateo visited after school and read the badge twice. Does this mean they have to listen to you now? He asked. Alina laughed. Some of the time, I hope. He touched the badge carefully. They should have before. The true aftermath of a day like that is never just about a saved job. Karen learned that authority without compassion exposes itself. Julian learned that success means little if it erases the hallway you came from. Alina learned that survival had not made her small. The following spring, the Ashcroft Grand hosted a city education fundraiser in the same ballroom outside which Alina had almost lost everything. This time, she entered through the front doors. She wore a simple green dress, and shoes Rosa insisted counted as an investment in dignity. Mateo stood beside her in a jacket slightly too big at the shoulders, holding a program because one of his drawings had been selected for the student art display. Julian met them near the entrance. For a moment, the three of them just stood there. No speeches, no symbolism, only the private knowledge of people who had seen what humiliation costs and what mercy can repair. You clean up nicely, Julian told Mateo. Mateo nodded gravely. You too, but you looked more important with soup trays. Julian laughed out loud. So did Alina. Later, Julian asked Alina to say a few words about community. She almost refused. Then Mateo squeezed her hand and whispered, "You don't have to be invisible." So she walked to the microphone. She spoke about work, dignity, and the people whose names never appear on plaques, though every decent institution depends on them. Then she looked at Mateo in the front row and said, very softly, "The morning I thought I was losing everything, my son said he could be invisible. I want a world that never teaches children to think disappearing is how they help the people they love." The room held still. "And I want workplaces," she said, voice stronger now, "that understand a parent protecting a child is not a disruption of professionalism. It may be the purest form of it." The applause mattered less than the faces. People did not merely look moved, they looked corrected. After the event, while staff cleared centerpieces under softer lights, Julian found Mateo staring up at the chandeliers. "When I was your age," Julian said, standing beside him, "I used to think places like this belonged to other people." Mateo kept looking up. "Do they?" Julian thought of his mother's gloved hands, of Alina in the corridor, of Rosa's muffin, Nia's bus fare, Otis's blue paint, and soup trays carried through fluorescent light. "No," he said at last. "They belong most to the people who keep them warm." And maybe that was the whole truth. The deeper truth was that memory, joined to decency, becomes shelter. That a quiet woman's endurance is never ordinary just because it happens off stage. And that sometimes the most important sentence in a room is spoken by a child who still knows how to ask the only question that matters. So did you come back for her? Maybe grace in real life is not thunder or music or a perfect ending. Maybe it is a door opening at the right moment, a memory refusing to go numb. A room full of working people deciding, one by one, to tell the truth about someone's worth. And a mother, exhausted and proud and no longer apologizing for love, finally understanding that dignity is not something power grants. It is something power was never meant to touch. If this story stayed with you, like the video, subscribe to the channel, and share it with someone who still believes quiet people can change the ending.